Over the last 24 months, since HMD started producing numerous Nokia branded phones, the devices that they've been coming out with continue to impress me with just how much value is packed into the devices. Their latest device is this, the Nokia 8.1, which is the successor to the Nokia 7 Plus. At first glance, the overall design feels quite similar to the Nokia 7 Plus. In fact, there are a couple of things which almost seem downright identical. The dimensions are almost exactly the same, with the 7 Plus being just under 4mm taller than the 8.1. We have again also got that metallic accent running around the entire perimeter of the device. As for the ports, we get a USB Type-C connector at the bottom, as well as a 3.5mm audio jack along the top. To some extent, it's kinda cool to see Nokia still implementing the headphone jack, but then we should also mention that the sound quality gap between wired and wireless Bluetooth audio has shrunk substantially, especially with the LDAC format. Thankfully, since Android Oreo, LDAC compatibility comes standard on Android devices, so all you need then is either a pair of LDAC capable headphones or an affordable LDAC capable receiver like the $99 Ear Studio ES100, the super sweet $109 Shanling M0, or the latest device from FiiO, the awesome $150 M6. Still, at least having the option to hook up a pair of regular wired headphones to the 8.1 is nice. Getting back to Nokia's devices, the most obvious difference between the 7 Plus and the 8.1 comes down to the display. Despite being a slightly smaller device than the 7 Plus, the 8.1 actually has a 3% larger display along with 5.5% more pixels. This results in a 4% better screen-to-body ratio, as well as a slight but negligible increase in pixel density. This is all thanks to Nokia having followed a very popular 2018 design trend, specifically meaning that display notch. The display used here is an IPS LCD rather than an AMOLED type, but for the most part it does the job well as it provides decent legibility in outdoor and strong lighting environments. The Nokia 8.1 is available in 3 different color variants, namely blue silver, steel copper, and then lastly we've got this beautiful iron steel combination. I suppose they chose the iron name from a type of shade of iron oxide, but really it's somewhere between burgundy and a deep purple. Nope, not that deep purple, this deep purple. You don't really notice the color under regular indoor lighting, but under stronger lighting conditions and certain angles, that metallic finish really pops and it looks quite elegant. Unfortunately, Nokia does not seem interested in adding any sort of water or dust protection to their devices, as we are yet to see this feature on any of their devices. This is definitely one area where Nokia lags behind other manufacturers, as an IP67 or IP68 rating has almost become a standard feature from the likes of Samsung. Under the hood sits an octa-core Snapdragon 710 CPU along 4GB of RAM and 64GB of internal storage. The Snapdragon 710 is a mid-range performance CPU which sits somewhere between the 600 and 800 series chipsets. According to Qualcomm, the CPU clusters of the 710 are up to 20% faster, whereas the GPU is up to 35% faster as compared to the performance of the Snapdragon 660, which incidentally was the CPU used in the Nokia 7 Plus. What seems to make the 710 slower than higher performance chips is due to how the cores are divided up. Usually we would see an octa-core divided into 4 big cores that run at a higher clock speed and then 4 little cores that run at a slower speed. However, the 710 only has 2 big cores that run at up to 2.2 GHz, whereas the remaining 6 little cores are clocked at up to 1.7 GHz. So sure, it would have been nice to see a higher spec CPU and perhaps more RAM being included, but if we consider the software being used here, then what the 8.1 comes with is perfectly adequate. It's also worth mentioning that the 8.1 is a dual SIM device, but you can opt to forego a second SIM in favor of a micro SD card. The 8.1 ships with the latest Android 9 Pie, and as is the case with practically all of Nokia's latest devices, it's also part of the Android One program. This means that you not only get a near vanilla version of Android, but more important is that you're basically in the front of the row with regards to getting the latest Android security and software updates. Personally, I absolutely love the Android One program. I like the fluidity of the software, the cleanliness of the design, but above all, there's absolutely no bloatware. You might lose in terms of a lack of widgets and other software wizardry, but what you gain is uncluttered responsiveness. The Nokia 8.1 has followed the same trend that I've experienced with practically all of Nokia's latest devices, and that is a handset that is just so damn rock solid and reliable. Sure, you don't always get the flagship hardware specs, but this serves as a reminder that higher numbers don't automatically mean a better device, and nor does it necessarily make for a more satisfying daily usage experience. No, the 8.1 does not exactly have the fastest Snapdragon processor, and nor does it have 1 billion gigs of RAM, but it doesn't need any of that in order to still feel as responsive and smooth as a fully fledged flagship device during regular day-to-day usage. This is something that Nokia does exceptionally well. Irrespective of the price point, they make phones that feel and operate like quality devices. The camera seems to be yet another similarity between the 8.1 and the 7 Plus. But more importantly, that indicates a similarity to the flagship Nokia 8 Sirocco too. Admittedly, I can't say for certain that all three devices have the exact same camera setup, but the basic specs seem the same, and the layout on the back looks the same too. The only fairly obvious feature difference I can find is that the 8.1 does not have the zoom feature, and that's actual zoom, not digital, that is featured on the Sirocco and 7 Plus. The lenses themselves are made by Zeiss Optics, a brand which is synonymous with Nokia mobiles for well over a decade now. The image quality produced by the 12 megapixel and 13 megapixel dual shooter is pretty respectable, especially considering the relatively modest price point. The white balance seems to be accurate for the most part, but we can definitely see some over-sharpening. One particular downside I found is that there's no raw image mode, like you would find on some other smartphones. To be fair, this feature also was not present on Nokia's higher-end phones either, but it would have been nice to see this included in their newer devices. It's also capable of shooting 4K video and even slow motion sequences, but the slow motion is limited to a resolution of 1920 by 1080. As is the case with practically all smartphones, the cameras best perform in outdoor situations and with natural lighting. As we can see in these images, the Nokia 8.1's camera produces some nice colors and a decent amount of dynamic range. On the contrary, when we move to the artificial lighting conditions, then we can see some blatantly overblown highlights and a bit too much sharpening. One thing to note is that the images produce very little noise, but I suspect this is some software trickery. My best guess would be that the noise is removed during processing, which in turn would also reduce the sharpness, and that might explain the obvious processed sharpening that we can see, as that would have been added after the noise is removed. Low-light images are also not particularly great, as we can again see an excessive amount of sharpening being applied. So, at the end of the day, the Nokia 8.1 is a roughly $400 device which could quite happily pass as a near flagship in terms of daily usage experience and build quality. No, it's obviously not going to break any benchmark performance records, but it also does not have the price tag of a record breaker. The camera gives satisfactory results for day-to-day usage, but can give some hit-and-miss results in low-light scenarios. But again, it wouldn't really be reasonable to expect the most amazing imaging results from this price bracket. More to the point, if the 8.1 does have the same camera setup as the $600 flagship Nokia 8 Sirocco, then $400 is starting to seem like even more of a bargain. So, if you're in the market for a new mid-range mobile device and your budget is at around the $400 mark, then the Nokia 8.1 seems like a perfectly viable option. Again, it might not come with a bunch of fancy software tweaks, but if you just want a simple and straightforward software experience, then the Nokia and the Android One program definitely has you covered. Well, that's it for this review. Thanks so much for watching. That's all from me for now, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.